Have you ever heard of a disappearance so strange, so haunting, that decades later it still leaves investigators, families, and even seasoned detectives completely unsettled? Tonight, we're stepping into one of the most disturbing missing persons cases of the 20th century. A case involving three young children, triplets, who vanished without a trace in 1981. Three siblings, identical in age, bound not only by blood, but by something deeper, a connection that should have made them inseparable. Yet on one ordinary day, their mother's life turned into a nightmare from which she would never wake. A nightmare that spanned decades, and then, 30 years later, a shocking discovery would emerge. One that would reopen old wounds, ignite new fears, and leave everyone questioning the truth they thought they knew. This is not just the story of a disappearance. It is the story of silence, of secrets buried for decades, and of a mother who never stopped searching. A story that will take us from the quiet suburbs of 1980s America, through years of unanswered questions, all the way to an unexpected revelation that changes everything. But let's go back to the very beginning. The year was 1981. America was in transition, post-Vietnam, still struggling with the shadows of the 1970s. Families were glued to their televisions watching news about rising crime rates, missing children warnings, and high-profile abductions that seemed to grip the nation almost weekly. But for one family, the nightmare wasn't on the screen. It was right at their doorstep. The mother of the triplets, a woman named Margaret, lived in a modest home with her children. Life wasn't perfect. Raising three children alone was never easy, but she had routines, structure, and above all else, love. Her children were her world. They were her reason to keep moving forward despite the hardships of life. But then, in a moment that seemed almost ordinary, everything changed. It was a warm afternoon when Margaret's triplets, just young, bright-eyed kids full of energy, went outside to play. It wasn't unusual. This was the early 80s, a time when children still played in yards, rode their bikes down quiet suburban streets, and parents didn't feel the constant weight of fear that we do today. Margaret stepped inside, just for a moment, maybe to take a call or fold the laundry. When she came back to check, the world had shifted. The yard was empty. The children were gone. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had wandered into a neighbor's yard, or playing hide and seek. But as the minutes turned into hours, panic began to creep in. Calls were made, neighbors began searching, and soon the police were involved. What started as a neighborhood search quickly spiraled into a full-scale investigation. But there were no footprints, no clues, no signs of struggle. It was as though the triplets had vanished into thin air. For investigators, the case was baffling. A single missing child is already a nightmare to solve. But three, at the exact same time, from the same location? It was almost unthinkable. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered that the children had been taken by someone the family knew. Others suggested something more sinister, that the disappearance was part of a larger, organized crime. After all, child trafficking in the 1980s, though rarely spoken of, was beginning to draw national attention. Could these three young lives have been caught up in something far darker than anyone could imagine? For Margaret, none of the theories mattered. What mattered was that her children were gone. She spent days without sleep, clinging to hope that at any moment they would come running back through the door. But each passing hour made that hope dimmer. Police interrogated neighbors, relatives, and even Margaret herself. Sadly, as with many missing children cases, suspicion often turns toward the parents. Was she hiding something? Could she have harmed her own children? Those questions alone were like daggers to a grieving mother already drowning in despair. But no evidence tied her to the disappearance. No evidence tied anyone to it. It was as if the children had been swallowed by the earth. And then the years began to pass. The posters faded. The news reports became less frequent. And like so many other cold cases, the disappearance of the triplets slipped from public memory. But not from Margaret's. She never gave up. She followed every lead, every phone call, every supposed sighting. Some claimed they saw three children matching the description in another state. Others swore the kids had been spotted with strangers at a bus station. Each time, Margaret chased the lead, and each time, it ended in disappointment. But what Margaret didn't know, what no one knew, was that decades later, a discovery would surface that would change everything. A discovery that would suggest the children hadn't simply vanished. A discovery that would uncover secrets darker than anyone could have imagined. The disappearance of the young triplets quickly spiraled into one of the most confounding mysteries local law enforcement had ever seen. For investigators, the problem was not just the absence of evidence, it was the complete void. Most abduction cases left behind some trace, some thread for police to follow, a footprint, a broken toy, a witness who saw something suspicious. But here, there was nothing. The yard where the children had been playing showed no signs of struggle. No broken branches, no torn clothing, no drag marks. It was as though the three simply walked off into the air. This left detectives with only two unsettling possibilities. Either the children left voluntarily, something unthinkable for kids that age, or they were taken by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who planned it. Someone who waited for the precise moment when Margaret stepped away, just for a few short minutes. The FBI soon became involved, and with their arrival came new theories. Could this have been the work of a child trafficking ring? During the early 1980s, several states were reporting disturbing patterns of children vanishing near parks, malls, and neighborhoods. Rumors circulated that networks were targeting multiple children at once, particularly siblings, because it was easier to control frightened children when they had no one but each other. If that were the case here, then the disappearance of 3 siblings wasn't just shocking, it was deliberate. But other investigators weren't convinced. They suggested something closer to home. Could someone within Margaret's circle have wanted to hurt her by taking what mattered most? Neighbors were questioned again and again. Friends were interviewed, coworkers examined. And through it all, suspicions sometimes circled back to Margaret herself. Not because of evidence, but because of the chilling reality. In most cases of missing children, investigators look first at the parents. But Margaret never faltered. She opened her home to searches. She sat through grueling interrogations. She even volunteered for lie detector tests multiple times. Each time, she passed. It wasn't Margaret. But if not her, then who? Weeks turned into months. The case grew colder. The search that had once consumed entire neighborhoods shrank to just a handful of officers, and eventually, to Margaret alone. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She kept the children's faces on posters, on flyers, in newspapers. She called radio stations, mailed photographs to schools across the country, begged television anchors to mention her children's names even for just 30 seconds of airtime. And sometimes, there were glimmers of hope. One caller swore they had seen 3 children, close in age, at a gas station 2 states away. Margaret drove through the night, her heart pounding, her hope rekindled. But when she arrived, the children were gone. Another tip placed the triplets in Florida, spotted near a bus terminal. Margaret scraped together what little money she had left, boarded a bus, and went searching. Again, nothing. Each false lead was like a knife. And yet, she kept moving forward. Because what else could a mother do? Meanwhile, theories continue to swirl. Some believe the triplets had been taken and raised by another family, living hidden lives under false names. Others whispered darker possibilities, that the children had been sold, their identities erased forever. And then there were the conspiracy theories, the ones too strange to ignore. Some said the government knew more than they let on. Others insisted the disappearance was linked to secret experiments, or that the children had been used in programs no one dared speak about publicly. Of course, these theories offered no real evidence, but they reflected one thing clearly. The disappearance of the triplets wasn't just a tragedy. It was a void that people tried desperately to fill with answers, no matter how far-fetched. Margaret's health began to suffer. The stress of searching, the endless nights without sleep, the years of chasing dead ends, it all began to take a toll. Friends drifted away, unable to live inside her constant grief. Even family members encouraged her to move on, to accept the unthinkable truth that her children were gone and they would never come back. But Margaret refused. For 30 years, she refused. And then, just as the world seemed to have forgotten, something happened. A discovery, a clue, something so shocking that it forced everyone, investigators, family, even strangers, to take another look at the case. It wasn't a body. It wasn't an object. It wasn't even something physical. It was a witness. A witness who had kept silent for decades. A witness who claimed to know what happened that day in 1981. What this person revealed would change the entire course of the investigation. It would shatter everything Margaret thought she knew. And it would take this case from a story of grief and unanswered questions into something far darker. For 30 years, the disappearance of the young triplets was a wound that never healed. Their photographs, once stapled to bulletin boards and taped to telephone poles, had faded with time. Most of the world moved on, but Margaret never did. She held on to hope with a grip so tight it defied the passing decades. And then, one ordinary morning, the phone rang. On the other end was a journalist, a name Margaret didn't recognize, who claimed to have stumbled upon a lead. At first, Margaret dismissed it. She had heard it all before. But this time was different. The journalist explained that a man had come forward with information he had been too afraid to share in 1981. He claimed that on the day of the disappearance, he saw a black sedan parked near the family's home. Inside, he caught a glimpse of 3 frightened children being hurried into the back seat by 2 men in uniforms. Uniforms that looked eerily similar to those worn by local security contractors at the time. It was a detail Margaret had never heard before. Investigators reopened the files. They dug into old records, and as they peeled back layers of forgotten evidence, one chilling thread began to emerge. Security firms contracted in the area during the early 80s had been linked to unsolved disappearances across multiple states. The possibility was horrifying that the triplets hadn't simply been taken by chance, but were part of something organized, something bigger. Margaret felt both dread and relief. Dread, because this meant her children had been stolen in a calculated act. Relief, because at last there was proof that she hadn't imagined it, that her children didn't just vanish into nothing. But the revelation didn't end there. Years later, another piece of the puzzle surfaced. A woman, living hundreds of miles away, came forward after seeing an age-progressed photo of one of the triplets in the news segment. She claimed she had known a family with 3 unusually quiet children who never seemed to attend school, who rarely played outside, and who disappeared from her neighborhood suddenly in the late 1980s. She remembered their faces. She remembered their eyes. The resemblance was uncanny. Investigators tried to track this lead, but by the time they followed the trail, it had gone cold again. The family had moved. Identities were changed. Records had been wiped. It was like chasing smoke. But for Margaret, this was confirmation. Her children had lived. Somewhere, somehow they had survived. The nightmare wasn't that they were gone. It was that they had been stolen, hidden, reshaped into lives that were never theirs. And then came the moment no one expected. 30 years after the disappearance, Margaret made a discovery of her own. Sorting through an old box of family belongings, she found a photograph that had been mailed anonymously years earlier, but buried in her grief and disbelief. It showed 3 children standing in front of a nondescript house. They were older, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, their faces blurred slightly by the camera. But Margaret knew. She didn't hesitate for a second. These are her triplets, her babies, alive. The photo was analyzed by experts, and though the results were inconclusive, there was enough resemblance to reignite the investigation once more. For Margaret, it was the proof she had always needed. Proof that she had been right. Proof that she wasn't crazy. To this day, the triplets' true fate remains one of the most haunting mysteries of the last century. Were they raised under new identities? Were they part of something far darker? Something the world may never uncover? No one can say for certain, but the story leaves us with a chilling truth. Sometimes, the people we love most can be taken from us in ways that defy logic, and sometimes the answers remain hidden just beyond reach. Margaret's journey is one of unyielding love, of unimaginable pain, and of relentless pursuit of truth. She proved that even when the world forgets, a mother never does. If this story gripped you, remember, mysteries like these remind us how fragile life can be and how deeply unanswered questions can haunt generations. What do you think really happened to the triplets? Were they stolen by an organized group? Or did they live hidden lives under new names? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your theories. And if you want more chilling true crime stories and unsolved mysteries just like this, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Together, we can keep these stories alive and maybe, just maybe, bring answers to the families still waiting for the truth.